Good evening and welcome to ArtTalk. I'm Laura Womack. Jen McHugh is our technical director.
Hi, everyone.
Offline is our content producer, Deanna Bocher, and our guest tonight is Curlee Raven Holton. Curlee paints, draws, and significantly, he prints, which is, of course, the medium of politics. His work is commentary on sensitive issues including race, poverty, class, and isolation. He uses symbolism and provocative, figurative representations to engage viewers in a conversation. Strong, graphic images of silhouettes, language, and nature convey deep emotional content. The strength of Curlee's work has led to a strong resume. I'm going to skim because there's so much, all of it impressive. Curlee's work has been featured at prestigious national and international venues including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and of course our own Michener Art Museum. His work is held in major collections, including the Library of Congress, the Yale University Art Gallery, the Philadelphia Museum, and the National Gallery. He earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Cleveland Institute of Art and an MFA with honors from Kent State University. He taught printmaking and African American history at Lafayette College, where he founded the Experimental Printmaking Institute, a collaborative workshop that has attracted international artists and produced work for major museum collections. Curlee serves as executive director of the David C. Driscoll Center at the University of Maryland and is the founding director and master printer of Raven Fine Art Editions, which you can find online. Not only is Curlee an artist extraordinaire, he supports the work of other artists by expanding access to professional printmaking, supporting them in marketing their work, and he facilitates placements in renowned art institutions. We are honored to have you on Art Talk, Curlee Raven Holton.
Thank you for having me. I look
And
forward to our conversation.
thanks to all of you in the audience. Join our conversation by sharing your questions in the Q&A. We love to have them. And now let's see some artwork. There's a portrait of Curlee in front of your work, and we'll get there we go. Do you want to comment, Curlee? Either one.
Yes, the one in the background is called Witness and is a silhouette of a figure. And it refers to the technique of veiling the identity of a witness that doesn't want their identity to be revealed. But in this particular case, I included text that talks about this witness being obscured and how witnesses and sort of a sense of authority and truthfulness is selective sometimes. Sometimes individuals, based upon their race or gender, are dismissed. Their opinions and their observations are dismissed. And I've had a case in my own experience where I was thought to be someone that had robbed a jewelry store when the robber had actually ran past me, and the policeman thought it was me based upon my race. And the owner of the store came out and said, no, no, it's not him, it's the other guy. So it was this assumption that I was guilty of some crime by virtue of race and that I had dreadlocks at that time. I was a young professor at Lafayette College. So this ideal of dismissing authority and identity, validity based on identity, and one's opinion is diminished or dismissed, subject to doubt, sometimes is racially based. And I find that disturbing because sometimes the witness actually has a truth of the event, but is dismissed because of their race and identity. And of course, we saw the culprit, me and another professor, and the policeman never asked us what we had seen. And we saw the culprit in the car leave the jewelry store. So he was unable to do his job because he was somehow occupied by this need to racialize me and his own kind of racism that he was carrying with him. So it can also be damaging to the victim, but also damaging to the perpetrator.
Right.
And the other piece that you showed right after that is titled Hands Up Nimbus. And this was in honor of the young people that were also protesting during the Hands Up and Black Lives Matter protests. And in this case, on this front pocket, there's a little stroke of blood. That was actually my blood added to the watercolor and the graphite drawing. And then I serigraphed the background, and then I did gold leaf to make a reference to this halo of, reference. And this halo predated Christianity. It was actually called a nimbus, and it was a symbol of pride and honor, recognizing youthful soldiers coming back after heroic uh, accomplishments and deeds. So I wanted to say that these young people were heroes in the community and just needed to be acknowledged and recognized. So it's Hands Up Nimbus. So it's more than hands up, but it's also asking the viewer, when they ask me about Nimbus, I also teach them a little bit about history and culture.
That's such an interesting history. I have never heard that before about Nimbus. I
Yeah.
assumed it was angel, which, would you apply that here as well?
Yes, and if you go back far enough, you'll see that if you see it in Buddha, you see it in Krishna, you see that reference to Jesus Christ. That halo represents a state of divine illumination and understanding. So it has an ancient history, again, predating the prominent use in Christianity.
Right. And then let's talk just a little bit about the medium. Um, did you say it's a drawing or is this a print?
This is the actual graphite drawing, the original graphite drawing, and then a watercolor in the background, and I did it as a serigraph with actual gold leafing on the surface.
Okay. Because even the drawing, I'm assuming that the young man and his shirt is the drawing. The way you've done it, it looks like a print.
Yes, yes. This is interesting because as a practitioner and as a printmaker, that printmaking techniques, that flatness and graphic quality influences my uh, painting and mixed media work. And conversely, the painting influences my print work, where I bring in texture and the illusion of texture in the printmaking.
Fascinating. Okay, Jem, what do we have next?
Yeah, this is the one I talked about before, witness. And the text reads, a witness in the shadow, only a distorted voice to hear. No name, no shame, just fear. I saw what happened, but to see me is to doubt my words. I am the other, the doubted one. Rejected perceptions and dismissed opinions. My answers are deemed irrelevant and suspect. However, I have the answer to the question you do not ask, the truth in the shadow you do not want to see. This is part of a series that I've been working on about being disappeared. Now, not only are individuals disappeared or dismissed or diminished because of race or gender, sometimes because of physical appearance, but also how we are dismissed because of our opinions about something. You can have a political view that is opposite of someone else's, and they dismiss your opinion and your view, or they isolate you in a community based upon that, or dismiss your value as a human. And the ultimate disappearance is when one reaches their demise. We disappear. And this has been really acute for me because recently I lost a close friend, Louis Tanner Moore. Well, it's been over a year now, but I'm very aware of his absence in my life. And it reminded me of the absence of my own father. And there's a piece that I also have that is about a story about my father, and it's called Cornbread and Buttermilk. And that was his favorite dish. He would dip his cornbread in his buttermilk as an evening snack. And I remember that, and his presence, and his story, and his experiences, and his unfulfilled dreams. So it is about the absence, not only the natural absence of someone, but the forces at play in our world that diminish us or push us back by our appearance or the stereotypes that precede us.
I think it's interesting that he's a silhouette. You use a lot of silhouettes in your work, and we just
Yes,
see the
yes.
only detail we see of him is just very dark, and you almost miss it, his eyes.
Just a little bit of the eyes. So I'm going to tell you about the process. So the background, I wanted it to appear to be almost a fabric like cloth. So I couldn't figure out how I wanted to do this. I didn't want it to be mechanical. So I actually bought some lace, white lace, and then I rolled a resistant liquid over the lace and then laid it on top of an open screen. And that liquid resistant would touch the screen and replicate the pattern. And when that dried, it was a resist. So when you inked it, the ink would pass through the areas that were open. And because of the liquid resist, which was now stable and dry and hard, it would resist the ink. So I would pick up the pattern. And I wanted it to be imperfect also, which it is. And then the plate, the dark plate, the black plate is actually cut out woodcut. I cut the shape out. And then just before I printed it relief, rolling ink over the top of it, very heavy ink, just before I printed it, I would take small cuts of sandpaper. I cut the eyes of sandpaper, cut the nose out of sandpaper, the mouth, and a little hair on the chin. Place it on the press after I ink that with a very small roller. And what happens is that ink stays on top of that surface of that uh, sandpaper, which has a very low surface, but it sits on top of that surface. And I place that on the plate before I lay the paper down. And when I went through the press, I would lift the paper up and then have to remove the eyes. And I had the impression I wanted it to be a subtle appearance of the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, almost as if you could see them, but you couldn't see them at the same time. So I was pleased with that experiment. I'd never done this before.
It's complicated. It
Yeah,
works.
yeah, yeah. I do a lot of that
Jen,
that I
what's
have never
next?
done before. Yeah,
You're known for your printmaking skills, Curly. Do you do a lot of experimentation?
I do. I do. I mix mediums. I test surface levels. I've always been amazed by the tolerance of a sheet of paper. Reed's BFK weaved paper, 200 pound. You could put almost a size of a nickel, thickness of a nickel through the press, and it still wouldn't break that paper, and it would pick up all the details. So I also did relief prints where I cut out sections so it would emboss the paper. So I like this idea of betraying the limits of the material. That this is a material, this is assumption, but you can push the boundaries of it, and I think that's real important. And I've always thought of printmaking as a metaphor of life, sort of a crucible. You pass a plate through the press, 100 pounds of pressure per square inch with a blanket on top, and you're not always sure what's going to come out on the other end, but you lift it up and you pull it out, and it's always a surprise, always amazing. And I like it that my prints aren't always perfect, or sometimes the color shifts. And I would actually do what they call textured prints. I would create texture on the surface of a sheet of paper with it motion, and then serigraph, and you would pick up different tonalities and textures and how the ink would lay on the side. And there was a printmaker that complained, criticized my work as not being perfect in registration. I says, yes, that's correct. You make prints and I make art. There's a difference.
There you go.
Never said anything else to me after
I'm
that.
sure. This is lovely, Curly. I really enjoy this one. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is the beginning of a series uh, uh, called The Song of Death. And this series is about an individual coming ashore, but he's bringing ashore with him all his demons. So he's dragging his demons ashore. And the piece is about how demons follow us, how our histories follow us. There's another piece in there that's titled Things That Won't Let Go. That is a figure running off the side of a cliff, and there are demons chasing him, connected to him, and he takes a leap. And the idea is that you have to leap and make an effort past your history, and you have to liberate yourself from those things that echo in the back that we inherit. And we all inherit these things from our parents, from our teachers, from our socialization, from our encounter with strangers, all the things we inherit. It's important to do a sort of self-archaeological dig on those things and liberate ourselves from those baggage and those things that follow us.
Nice.
The demons that he's bringing ashore with them.
Right. We all know those demons.
Sure.
Jen? And please join us with your questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, this one is from the same series called Chasing the Fire. And I tried to articulate in this four individuals running through a field as a flame. And they are actually chasing the flames. And the idea is that you chase the flame, and the flame can also consume you. You chase your passions, your desires, and they can also consume you. And a lot of that comes from pieces that are linked to this idea we carry this baggage with us. And it's important to examine our own psyches, our own ego drives, own need to validate ourselves and where that is coming from. We all have it. We all have the presence of an ego drive, and that's important because we have to assert ourselves in the world so that we can survive and protect ourselves and procreate and advance ourselves as a part of humanity. But also, we bring a lot of other things with us that we are carrying that sometimes distorts reality and distorts our need to be satisfied and our longing and our desires. So this is about chasing the flames that also can consume us. And so there are about 8 pieces in this series. So it's
It's real.
interesting that my work parallels. I'm never without a subject, and the reason I'm never without a subject is because my work parallels my own sort of sense of self and my own investigation of myself, my own analysis of myself, my own desire to be uh, current and to be present with myself. There's a saying, the painful bite of self-wit. How do you discover yourself and what are you willing to do? And there's so much inside of us because we learn so much from others and we encounter reality day in and day out. And we're always trying to reconcile our existence in the world, even if we don't know we're doing it. We're doing it with possessions, with work, our need to succeed at work, to generate significant income, to sustain ourselves and our family, to build a future. We're all dealing with a real fragile world, even if we don't know it's fragile. It's extremely fragile. And we work very hard to create a sense of stability. And we make an assumption about tomorrow. We assume that we're going to wake up each day until we don't. Now, some
Yeah.
of these subjects are deemed to be heavy for my audience when I talk about them. I'm interested in them for 2 reasons. Not only because it helps me understand my world, but I also know these things are not being talked about or discussed. Uh, and I'm interested in subject matter that speaks about our humanity, that transcends race and identity, but can be fed through experiences with race and identity. And the language can come from experiences through culture and race and identity. But the motive and strategy is to create the most meaningful work I can create about the human experience that is reflected through my own experience. There's a great saying that the individual can speak of the world around them. The universal reflects the individual. The individual reflects the universal. So if I could tell my story, it also tells our story. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, this is a piece I referred to earlier, when things won't let go. So you see the demons are held onto his back. And this hook that's on the back, you see it used in Native American culture and also some Asian cultures, where it's a sign of devotion. So the participant or the devotee would hook the talon to the back of the skin, in some cases, pull themselves back, especially the Native Americans. And then these Asians would hook it to their back and put themselves on carousels and spin themselves around. And when you have the most severe pain is when you communicate with God, with the divine, through pain. And you can see, and one of the ropes is broken, and that demon has let go. So the figure is actually breaking loose from that demon, but he must risk the fall. He must risk the leap to free himself from the past.
so one of the things that occurs to me when I'm looking at this Curly is that, it's a very intense subject. We understand it even better now with your explanation. And yet there's a simple beauty to it. The lines in the background, the composition. How do you ever think about beauty versus the intensity or the darkness of your subject?
This is interesting you raise this. I've never thought about it in that particular way, but yes, it's to reconcile both the beauty and the pain that goes along with living, the joy and the pain. We're angels with feet of mud that are tied to the soil. That is the existence. I believe the anxiety of being a human is that we have a divine element to our existence as well as this temporal element that is declining always because of this state of matter. So in this particular case, it's a silk screen in the background where I do what you call a rainbow roll, where you roll out the colors, you place the colors on a plate with a palette knife, and then you take a roller and you roll over the group of colors where the gradation of the color changes. And then I would do a rainbow roll over the plate, or I'd pull the screen in the same way, pour the ink on the screen, and then pull it. And the screen slowly mixes so everyone is different, but I want to have this sort of sunset background. And then I would do the foreground, which is the object of the cliff that he's on, and a related kind of red, a richer red, maybe a blood red. And then I would make the plate and print the figure with two plates, the black figure, after I print the gray figures that captures the sky, the middle ground, and the lower part. Then I print the black figures. Then I come back with another serigraph that I would do by hand with a small sponge and print the cloud that they're coming out of. So it's
All
all,
right.
and every step is a new step, and this is a tradition of a painter. The way you learn to paint and studying painting is once you put the first color down, it teaches you to put the second color down. And I was taught to teach with a chromatic palette. So if you put a purple down, the next color was going to be an orange or a yellow. If you put a yellow down, the next color was going to be a blue. If you put a blue down, the next color was going to be an orange or a red. So I use the same kind of approach in printmaking. So I build the print. And I think that makes the print more organic. I think it makes the print more interesting and more sensual. And I do want my work to be sensual. So I think that's what you're referring to, the sensuality of it and the ideal that it can have a body to it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Dimensionality. All right, let's take a look at the next slide, please, Jen.
Yeah, this is a series that predated the Song of Death series called Deluge. And this began with a series of 8 drawings using water as a metaphor, as a flooding element. And some of these were taken from storms, but they're not about storms. Often when people look at them, they would think about Katrina or the disastrous storms off New Jersey coast or the coast of New York. But this was not about that. This was about how events overtake your life. So when you look up the word definition of deluge, it's not just about storms and water and flooding. It's all about being overwhelmed by emotions. So this was part of the series. So you see a young girl here. She's standing on a door that's floating in the water. And on the water surface, the water is floating. You can't see clearly, but her drawings of photographs that remain from her life. And she has a fish in her mouth. So now this represents that she has lost her innocence. She's had to capture that fish and eat that fish raw to survive. Now in the background, you see people climbing on top of houses. We remember we saw this during Katrina. The houses are flooded, but the young girl is forced to be on her own. So this is about how events like this, and we've seen this, dramatic natural events have come. We saw this in California with the flooding and the fires, and you saw little kids. They would find little kids who had lost their parents on their own. This was amazing. Some of them surviving. You would hear earthquakes around the world where underneath they would find a child buried underneath the debris and the rubble. So this was about survival. And you can see the photographs a little bit clearer in this painting floating on the surface. And the photographs are her history. And look how precarious the dory is. But she is
Yeah.
quiet, hands raised. She'll survive.
It's powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have a question from our audience. Jen's going to help us with that.
Okay, Curly. Emily said, so rich, your work and eloquence. She also said, I like your technical expertise and the use of your words to describe it. Her question was, I wonder why you wanted to be an artist at such a young age. Were you encouraged early in life?
This is interesting. Not necessarily by anyone in my household. My parents were not aware of art world. We only had a few books in the household: Ebony magazine, Jet magazine, and the Sears catalog. You know, there wasn't much reading going on, and the Bible, of course. They were both, had Christian background families. They were farmers from the South. My both dropped out of school. My father's father died when he was a young man, so he had to become the head of household. Uh, uh, they were very resourceful, very smart, but uneducated. And I came up. My father worked in a factory as a foundry, iron worker all his life. Mother worked as a domestic early in her life until later. She retired from that. But they were all very strong-willed, very clear, very intelligent people. And so that background was present with me. And the art came about by accident. I was able to draw, and I had an older brother that would draw, and I would look over his shoulder, and I decided to imitate him. He didn't pursue the career of an artist, but he would draw, and he was good. And I started to draw a little bit, horses and Abraham Lincoln and things like that. And my teachers recognized it early on. They saw me draw, and they encouraged me. My teachers were really the way in which I discovered who I was as a young artist. They encouraged me. They took me to the museums in Cleveland. Now, Cleveland was a racially divided town that was a had segregated education system for the most part, and was found guilty by the federal government as practicing segregation in the schools. An example of that is they would send books to the predominantly white schools, but sometimes would not send books to the schools that were predominantly black. And they found those books stored away in warehouses. So this was a act of racism and segregation. They found them guilty, and they brought in a special master to monitor that, and that one of those special masters was to end up being my wife. So I met her while she was one of the special masters.
Oh my goodness.
I was doing a series about early series of watercolors about busing in Cleveland, Ohio. But my teachers took us to the east side. I'd never been to the east side of Cleveland. This is where all the museums were. So I went to the Cleveland Museum of Art, and it changed my life. And then I met a teacher who was my junior high school coach for track and field, Nelson Stevens, who was also an artist. He taught at the Cleveland Museum of Art on Saturdays, introduced me to the museum as a young student to take a class there. Later, I began to teach classes there on Saturdays when I finished high school. And I decided to go to the Cleveland Institute of Art after attending community college for a while. And I went night school. I had gotten drafted into the military in 1971 at the end of Vietnam. And after I got out in 1973, I began to go to night school and eventually went to Cleveland Institute of Art. But I had these people that encouraged me along the way. And I met a mentor uh, in Cleveland as well, uh, Murtis Taylor Mills, who was a very prominent social worker, art collector, and a member of Caramoo House in Cleveland. Caramoo House was a settlement house built in the turn of the century by two Quakers from Oberlin College. This was a movement during the 1920s and 30s to establish some kind of cultural center in black communities around the country. They did a community center in Chicago. They did it in Houston. They did it in Cleveland. They did it in Detroit. Well, in Cleveland, it was called the Caramoo House. So I would go to the Caramoo House and take classes and sometimes teach kids. I would make sometimes pieces for the plays. I would make watermelons or corn or props for the plays they would put on. And sometimes playwrights, they would do famous plays. Gordon Parks would come there. I met Gordon Parks there. I met Romeo Bearden, a famous artist there. All these famous artists would come and playwrights because these community centers existed around the country, and that's where they would test their plays out. So that was another encouraging environment. And Murders Taylor Mills collected my work and encouraged my work. And finally, I began to attend the Institute of Art on a full-time basis and got a scholarship to Kent State. But there were community members that did this. And Ed Parker, as I mentioned earlier, Edward Parker was someone that had a library in his home, invited me over one Saturday as an artist. And this was the first time I had met other artists and the first time I read a book that actually documented African American artists. And in that book by James Porter, Modern Negro Art, I think it was published 1943, was a work by Palmer Hayden, Janitor Who Paints. And it showed a janitor in the basement of a tenement building painting a portrait of his wife holding a baby. At that moment in time, was working nights as a janitor at NASA to pay for school. And I realized that if he could do it, I could do it.
Oh, what a great story. I don't think people would necessarily realize that Cleveland Museum of Art is, one of our great, it's small, but it's a great museum. It had early
Absolutely.
American wealth. So what a wonderful place to be
The
exposed to
directors
when you're young.
were just phenomenal. The director Sherman, they would open the door to you, welcome you in. I had my first major museum show there, and the first work to go into a museum collection was in Cleveland. And I recently placed another work in the Cleveland Museum of Art collection. And I had a work in a retrospective show that was a documentation of Caramoo House in the Harlem Renaissance. Phenomenal catalog and publication. You should look that up.
I'm going to do that. Thank you. All right, let's get back and look at some more art.
Sure.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, this is part of the Deluge series, and this is called Resilience. And you can see the house is turned upside down, the tree is upside down, and the water is part of the water is in turmoil, and she's standing on a rock. And to her, at her rear, the waters have calmed down. Her presence is a sense of resistance and resilience. And this is a black female as this archetype, as a symbol of support and continuation and faith in oneself. I see so many occasions where I'll see an artist or an individual, African American male especially, or female, and they refer back to their grandmother on a regular basis about their grandmother. If it wasn't for my grandmother or my mother for instilling in me an affection, this is not just African Americans, but I've seen in many other cases, it is that mother figure that is the rock that has been there. And this is a homage to her.
It's an incredible image. I think if I would love for you to talk about the composition and the color that you've done here because it's simple in composition, or the elements are simple,
Sure.
uh, but there's a lot that's roiling. Of course, that goes to your subject matter. How did you accomplish this? Because I'm so attracted to this image.
Since there's a narrative quality in all my work, and the narrative is very important to me, and that you assert a story, you tell the story, because embodied in the story, embedded in the story is a sense of authenticity, a sense of truth. And there's a great saying in West Africa. I went to West Africa on a Fulbright, and I studied traditional African religions and cultural practices. And one of the scholars told me that you can bury the truth in the deepest hole, and it'll find its way to the top. And that we have to link all our hands together around a giant Balboa tree to know the truth. So there is a truth in all of us that has to come forward. And I think it's important not to diminish that truth or to dismiss it or belittle it. So it is assertion of that strength and validity. Now, in this particular piece, this is a collector of mine. Would come in my studio and buy work. And one day I asked her, would you model for me? I was so struck by her presence. And she was a little nervous, but she agreed to it. Now, all my figurative work are life models in my figurative work. I don't go out and necessarily, uh, uh, hire people, professional models, but I'll ask individuals that I think fit. And my kids will complain about this all the time. My wife will, My children complain about this. I have to borrow their hands, or I have to borrow their heads, or they have to pose for me in the middle of the day. Actually, my assistant tomorrow has to pose for me with lace draped over her. She doesn't know this yet, but this is for the painting of work, you know. So, but she'll do it, you know. I need to have her do this for me. So this piece comes from that. So the surface, I paint these paintings on a Formica surface that has a wood framing in the back. And the reason I do that because I want the surface to have a lot of tolerance, because I'll put a material on a textured paint, sometimes a modeling paste, and I'll grind it back down the surface, and then I'll paint, and then I'll grind it back down with a fine sand with an automatic grinder. I do this so I want to take it back, and then I add to it, so I keep building until I get to the point of casting the shadows on it. So that's partly how I build it.
It's amazing. And I love her, just everything about her. You know, it's again, it appears to be very simple, but the complexity of who she is, you've conveyed so well with the arms, the expression on her face, her stance. I mean, she herself is a narrative.
You know, interesting enough, this is a lesson I learned in writing, is that you always keep it as direct and simple as possible to get rid of what you don't need to communicate your ideal to the reader. And I'm always editing my stuff so I can get out the things that are extraneous, that aren't necessary, that may be ego satisfying, but are not about the subject. And the subject to me in a narrative is more important than the medium or the vehicle. Actually, that's what leads me to the medium or the choice of material. I'm not someone that pays homage to the material necessarily. And I met artists like this, artists who study painting, that master the skill of painting, that master the skill of printmaking. I see them as tools, and I'm trying to master my concept. I'm trying to articulate and represent my vision with the strongest metaphors that I can, the clearest metaphors, without a lot of noise.
Well, I think you accomplished that very well. What do we have next, Jen?
Yeah, this is another drawing, a part of the series. And this is about a figure that's isolated from his community, the prophet. And you can see figures inside closely that are noticing that he's there. There's about 4 figures that are pointing to him, one in the white in the foreground, the others along the left edge. But for the most part, they belong to the herd, the masses. They don't see anyone else. They don't hear anyone else. They don't hear the storm outside. They don't see the prophet that is on top of the anthill with a mask on. And this is another artist that I use as a model. This is Beresford Booth. Jen, I think you might know Beresford Booth. This is Beresford Booth. And he is a prophet in this particular case. And that's what this piece is about. Someone telling us, has an answer, but only a few of us pay attention to the answer.
Oh, I love that. So here again, this is actually, again, there's so much complexity in the way you've achieved this with, is this water that we're seeing here?
Yeah, that's water beneath, and I work on these on the water. I want to get the waves and the reflection. And then there's a shadow exactly the same underneath. You see it echoed underneath, especially when you see the live piece. So it's a lot of work, and I work on it, and I work on it, and I stop, and I work on it, and I stop. I don't work late at night as an artist. I'm a very early worker. I work for a few hours. I go about my day, and all the time I'm thinking about it. So I will have a picture of the image on my camera, and during the day I may be looking at it. I'm doing more of that now. I have time where I'm reading, and I'll stop, and I'll just look at the image, and think about what I might do to address a particular issue that the hand is not articulated well enough. I don't want to do a detailed rendering of the hand. I want to represent the hand, the light, the way the light hits the fingers, the shadows, the three-dimensionality. But I'm not trying to draw a precise hand. I want to
Right.
represent the hand. And so
And
there's this
there's
looseness, this quality there.
And there's so much detail in the people who build sort of a mountain all by themselves.
Yeah, you know, I've never counted the number of faces. I'm gonna have to go back and do that.
I think you might get lost with that one. I
Yeah, I've
would
never
for sure.
counted them, but that's what this is about.
We have another question. I love it when we get questions from the audience.
Okay, Cassie Wall wants to know, in the artwork entitled Nimbus,
Ah,
I quickly noticed a few of the subject's fingers are outside the nimbus.
yes.
What's the significance?
This is interesting. There's a part where the element represents society. His hands are up. He's faced the police, or he's surrendering as a part of society. But the remainder, the blue and the fingers and the halo, are part of a divine kind of sensibility. If you know, and if you study Buddhism at all and things like that, that color of blue is divine, a reach of divinity and illumination. So it's that space that we always operate in. And it also represents a duality of living. We had this sort of presence of society, but we have this internal self. And this is a really intriguing thing to me. We operate with this ideal of having a soul or a spirit, but this sense of consciousness. And that sense of consciousness leaves, and we think of the spirit leaving when the body, and the life of the body is. But there's just two spaces we're always operating in. And I think it's amazing that we got this temporal self, this plastic body, so to speak, that we put clothes on and we present to the public. But inside we got this self, this energy, this identity, this sense of egotism, the sense of ego self, the sense of self-consciousness and awareness. I think it's such a dynamic to negotiate and to reconcile and to be in the world with that. And you see this operating all the time. You can see this consciousness in someone when you look at their eyes or you watch their motions of their mouth or the tremble of their body sometimes. Sometimes you'll see someone at a table and they'll be reading or eating and you see their foot moving or their leg moving. You know, a certain kind of nervousness shows up. So the body speaks. That's the energy inside, the identity inside, the self that's inside. And so that's that hand representing that external world, and the rest of him, the sort of internal, blissful. Uh, and it reminds me of the film I was watching recently of Martin Luther King, where he was standing on the, they talked to him into coming to church to give a sermon in the rain the evening before he was murdered, assassinated. And he didn't want to go, and he finally showed up at the last hour, and he had given a speech he had never written, had not prepared for, and he had said that he was ready, that he had seen the coming. And it just moves me. And you knew then at that moment that that was his spirit speaking, his spirit. And he said he had reconciled himself with living and dying, and he was no longer frightened of dying. And that's who spoke to that audience. And they said it was the greatest speech that he's ever given. So it's in us. It's in us. And we do it. We make decisions with our children. We make decisions at work. We make decisions every day. And we're guided by this sense of rightfulness and truthfulness. And that comes from inside us. That's what the piece is about. That's a lot, right?
That's amazing, is what that is. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Okay, we're going to go back to another piece of artwork, and we just really appreciate your luscious descriptions.
This is again another part of the disappearance series, being made to dismiss, being dismissed. And the text in the window talks about being left alone, these two kids, and that they're calling out and nobody hears them, that the phone is not working, that the electricity is no longer working, and they're cold because the heater is off. There's no more food in the refrigerator. And they're saying, do you hear me? Do you see me? And it's called Broken Window. This was the second piece in that series that goes along with the witness piece. And this ideal of people being dismissed. Now, this was a problematic piece because conceptually, it was hard for me to pull it off because I was trying to get a sense of glass. I was trying to print the last piece as a frame, which I actually cut out but it was not, when I had the screen made, the screen was in reverse. So it printed the figures in reverse. So I had to switch them again, switch the screen, and then come back and print again, and then hand stencil so I could get reflections on the window to cause the figures to push them back. Now, originally they were printed in black and white, a very strong image, but it needed to be obscured. I wanted you to sort of see them, but also walk away from them. So it's called broken window. And the broken window, of course, is not only a metaphor for the window, but the environments that are broken. We see this all the time. Environments that are broken, that are live in abject poverty. We saw recently with the event of the loss of food stamps and SNAP, and how that crosses all racial lines and ethnic lines. Americans that need support, and how fragile that reality is. So
There's also the broken window law enforcement
precisely,
policy of no tolerance.
yes,
Like,
precisely.
yeah.
Because this is what is happening. Part of my work, I don't specifically are talking about that subject, but I did a new piece that is specifically about the confrontation between the public and the authorities. And it comes out of a new series I'm working on called The Violence of the Empire.
We look forward to that. Jen, there we go.
Yeah. This is a small series. I did small print series, and I was interested in doing small prints about big ideas. Because there's a thinking that big is better. Big paintings, giant paintings, they're always better. They're not. It's the ideal, not the painting, not the scale, not the size of a work of art. Statements like thoughts are things, character is destiny, things like that always struck me. So this is a piece about nature and how nature gives birth to us, and how we give birth to offsprings, but we also are being given birth by nature. We're falling out of pods from nature. So I wanted to remind us that we are also connected from nature, because it's very easy to think we are not. So this comes out of this fertile nature, the idea that nature is giving us who we are. And you look at the body of our bodies, and bodies reflect nature. In the Dogon culture in Mali, Africa, you can see the dwellings are built like the shape of a woman's body. And there's a myth that the way the earth came into existence was the sky was attempting to have intercourse with the mother, the earth, and broke away the anthill, which is a symbol of circumcision, the impregnate earth to produce humanity. So it's this idea that the earth has a lot to do with our being a seed of earth and the offspring of earth. So it's about reconnecting with that.
It's really a powerful image.
And little, small, 9 inches by 9 inches.
So is it difficult to work small?
Uh, there's some challenges with it, because you have to think through a lot of things to do it, because you're not only compressing, but the space of working area is restricted. So it's
Right.
compressing, and it's also affecting the viewer. I've been locked into this 22 by 30 inch uh, sort of rectangle for a long time, because as a printmaker, the standard sheet is 22 by 30. So you're always working with that scale. So I'm trying to shift now. So I'm up to the largest woodcut I've ever cut out. I'm doing now, which is about 44 by 30 inches wide.
Okay. So, Curly, we're running out of time. I wanted to ask you before we go back to more work. You've done a lot to help other artists. You founded the print program. You help artists place. Why are you working so hard for other people?
Well, I've always been taught that generosity uh, is a very important thing, and to share with others. So generosity breeds generosity. I'm a firm believer in that I've done things, I know that I've contributed, and things have come to me because of that. I understand that, and I believe that. And I'm gonna give you an example. The Experimental Printmaking Institute was established. I wanted to create a workshop because I studied with at Bob Blackburn's printmaking workshop in New York City, and that was important to me. And it was an inspirational space, because it was based on the principle that if you could get to the space, he was going to create an opportunity for you to make work. And the cost was very modest. You had to pay for a locker, pay for materials, but he was going to give you those presses that you couldn't buy on your own. So one night I was at a welcoming dinner. I have a new professor at Lafayette College. I just arrived. So I was at a dinner with a number of other new professors. And there was an artist that I met there. And she was introduced to me. I was introduced to her as a printmaker. And she said she always wanted to make prints. I said, well, why don't you come to the studio? This is before EPI. I just had a little print shop that was inside of a residence. My press was on the first floor. My sink that I had in the kitchen was the sink I used to wet the paper. My working tables were in the dining room. My etching space was on the back porch. So I didn't have a print studio. It was a residence. And I said, well, this is outrageous. Come and make a print with me. This would be great. So I went to the chairman of the department. I just hired. And I said, I invited this woman, artist, to come to the studio and make a print with me. She said, you can't do that. You can't invite anybody in that's not a student of the college. I says, okay. So I fixed that. So I went to the president and the provost and told him, you hired me with a promise to allow me to establish a workshop and give me a dedicated space. I want it. And as soon as I got it, I invited that artist and every other artist I could invite because I wanted culture to be present. So I invited artists from South Africa, from Great Britain, from France, from India, from Jamaica, Costa Rica, Mexico. So I had artists from everywhere, and it was the most culturally diverse program on the campus. So I invited artists, and I told them I'd buy your ticket, I would provide housing, and I would arrange passport arrangements with you, and all the materials for your work, and invite the community in to see you working. And I made that possible because of a student and their parents. I had a young student who I had in class, but after class we had a drumming session, and I used to play with a band on campus when I first started. I had to stop that quickly because we always played at the frat houses, and sometimes they got engaged with things that was not appropriate for a professor to be around. So I stopped doing that, but I would go to drumming sessions. And he was there, and he said, I'm just taking a class with you. I'm intimidated by art, and I love drumming with you. Can I come and talk to you? He took a class with me, and a visiting artist came in from Washington, Ulysses Marshall. I let him help on the print. His parents were visiting. I said, I'm going to let you help on this print. You don't know anything about printmaking, but I'm going to get you involved so you can impress your parents on the parent visiting day. And they loved it, and they said, my son wants to be an artist. How can I help? I said, well, I think he can be an artist. I was really, trying to make his parents feel secure. Do you really want him to be an artist at Lafayette College? Because, we had an art major, but it wasn't really a fine arts program. And she said, yes, and I'm willing to help you out. What do you need? I said, we need a giant press. We just had a little press we had inherited. So they bought me the presses, the rollers, and they supported the Experimental Printmaking Institute for 15 years.
Holy cow.
Almost $1 million over the 15-year period they gave to the Printmaking Institute. There's now an artist residency named in my honor by that same donor. And when they would call me, we were so close, me and that student, that the parents would call me to ask me how he was doing. Not in class, how he was doing with his girlfriend, how he was doing with his friends. And then I would go see them in Stamford, Connecticut, and they were very supportive of me, and they thought of me as a surrogate father. And he thinks of me as that way as well. He actually called me to tell me his wife was expecting before he called his parents.
That's amazing. So yeah, generosity
So it was,
begets, that's a pretty big payoff.
he is as generous as
And
well.
you would never expect it when you set out.
Never expected. Nope. Didn't know that
Yeah.
was coming around the corner.
Yeah. That's a wonderful note. We're going to take a look at one last piece of art. We want to see all we can.
Yes. This is a series that was shown, three pieces from the series was shown at the gallery in Bucks County. This is a series called Sublimation and Self-Emancipation. There's sublimation a narrative of self-emancipation. This was a commission from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and it's an artist book with 8 images in it, and I also did them as independent seriographs. And this is called Blackbirds. And then this particular piece is about the symbol of the blackbird that was important during in the South and during slavery as a sign of freedom, and that it carried messages. This also was a symbol in West Indies as well for the same reason. So I included it in this text. And when I was doing it, I recalled that there was a song about the blackbird that was made popular in America. So I researched the song, and it was actually written by Paul McCartney of the Beatles, and later sung by Nina Simone and then Beyonce. Now, in the other panels, I included folk songs from slavery, and of course, because that was after 100 years, there was no copyright infringement, so I could actually include like, you know, Sing the Boat Ashore, Go Down Moses, things like that. But this piece, I wrote the song myself because Paul McCartney, there were copyright privileges, and I wouldn't want the Beatles Foundation to come after me because of this. So I wrote the song myself. What does a blackbird mean? A slave, to a slave, it is a symbol of captivity and freedom. It is remembered. Oh, it is. What is it? I can't read that for me. Okay. Well, it's from the earth, but you have to read the song. He keeps his wing close to his body. So it's a song written just for this, and it's about the blackbird and the slave having faith in tomorrow. This series is, as I mentioned, one of 8 pieces.
I think faith in tomorrow is a really good note to end on. We all need faith in tomorrow.
Sure.
Curlee Raven Holton, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful stories and your beautiful artwork with us. I'm so honored that you were on Art Talk with us.
I don't know, artists don't always have an opportunity to really speak so intimately about their work in detail, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Well, we're glad to share it. Thank you also in the audience for joining us. We hope you'll join us again on February 25th when we're very excited to welcome Ann Corso, CEO of the Michener Art Museum. We'll ask her about her vision for the museum and lots more, including your questions. Many thanks to Jen McHugh, our technical director.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Curlee.
Thank you for the help. Great.
Deanna Bocher is our content producer, and she's doing a great job, as you can tell. And I'm your host, Laura Womack. Good night.
Thank you. Couldn't tell the story without you, Laura.
Thanks, Curlee.